Good evening. Welcome to our Bible study tonight. Let me make sure I got my volume all the way up here. Can you believe it is December 2nd? We are 23 days away from Christmas. That just blows my mind how time flies. But I am so glad to be able to connect with you this way tonight, and I'm so grateful for our church family and how we are coming through these times. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and there's a whole lot of folks hurting out there, but we are continuing our ministry, and we're just going to keep doing the next right thing. I'm so proud of our church family. I just want to give you a couple updates. We've had two mission opportunities that we have been involved in. One has been with the Olive Branch Ministries to get shoeboxes to the poorest county of kids up in McCrary area of Kentucky. And also, we took on the goal of replacing the computer lab at the Western Heights Baptist Center. And I'm so pleased to tell you that we have exceeded our goals in both of those projects. And that just speaks so well of our church family. And I want to thank everyone for your participation in that and for the continued ministries of West Hills Baptist Church. Tonight, we're going to continue to look at the people in the Bible that is a part of Glad Reunion, meeting ourselves in the lives of Bible men and women. This is Dr. Claypool's book. It's just a fresh approach to each of the people, the names that we know in the Bible, but we just don't know a whole lot of details. So many times we tend to focus on just one or two stories at the expense of the whole story of the person, and we miss out on so much. And that's what he does so well in this book. Well, Solomon was the third king of Israel. Remember, Saul was first, and then King David, and then King David managed to make sure that his son Solomon became the third king. And his reign marked the fulfillment of the promise of Abraham that God made to Abraham. All of the Holy Land was now under control of the Hebrews, and they were the grandest and most influential power of that day. So the rule of Solomon marked the end of the heroic period of Israel's life. He did not, become king because he was a powerful warrior or a charismatic leader, but this is when the dynastic process, meaning the king could designate his own successor, and of course that's what King David did. But his story is so real, and this is one of the reasons we can trust the Bible so much, is that the Bible is honest about how all of these people are mixed creatures. They all have a mixture of lightness and darkness in them, strengths and weaknesses. And King Solomon, for all his fabled glory, is no exception. There's so much to learn about him. There's so much to be admired, and yet there's also really a terrifying aspect of his life, of how his life ended, and really how his life just almost went in the opposite direction by the time he died. Well, the first thing that we have to really be thankful for in his example is how he began his reign. He wasn't like a great big charismatic leader, but even as a child, when he began his reign, when God came to him in a dream and said, "What would you want? What is what's the thing that is closest to your heart?" He had the wisdom to ask for a discerning heart, how to reign properly. And that's such a thing to be admired. I think the way we would understand it is this: what happens when someone comes into a lot of money? Does it change them, or does it reveal who they really are? We know that it reveals who they really are. So we see this in light. He could have had anything, and yet he chose for wisdom a discerning heart about how to reign well. He says, to know how to be one's true self and to do things that the circumstances of life lay upon one is the finest gift of all. And Solomon is to be commended for recognizing this fact so early in his personal pilgrimage. Most of us only come to this realization far into our adulthood. Fame, money, power, physical satisfaction, these are the goals to which we tend to aspire in our early stages of life. And it's only after we've experienced how little satisfaction these things really bring that we begin to desire wisdom above all else. What is wisdom? Well, wisdom is something that God wants to give us. He wants to have it in abundance. But God, by his very nature, love does not coerce. So he's not going to force it on us against our will. I love how he words this. This is so reflective of my life. He says, God generally allows us to have it only to experience in ourselves how much less this is than what he wants for us. In other words, I can tell you in my life, for the things I've really wanted, God has pretty much allowed me to have them. You get a few years behind you and you realize that God wanted even more for you. And if you had wanted those things more, he would have allowed you to have those things as well. So he says, wisdom is the ability to discern correctly what to do and how to do it. He says the other thing I find admirable about Solomon is the attitude he assumed towards the past and his connections with it. He was aware of the desire of his father's heart had been to build a temple for God. David, lived in this beautiful palace, but he was ashamed that the Ark of the Covenant was in a tent, and he wanted to be able to build a temple, but he was unable to do that. And Solomon was able to be connected to those desires and to make that happen in his lifetime. He says, no individual is an island unto him or herself. We do not begin out of nothing, but we enter a stream of connectedness that flows from a distant past. To live for a single moment is to be in constant interaction between the dead and the living and the yet unborn. He quotes a man, he says that we are a part of an ongoingness. I believe we need to recognize this fact and act accordingly. I know you've heard me say this many times at our church that, God expects us to stand on the shoulders of those who came before us to be able to see even farther. And we have such a rich past in our church family, so many wonderful people that came before us and would be so proud of the things that we're doing now and the ministries that we're doing now. We're connected. And I also hope you will always hear me say that we're supposed to leave things better than we found them. We're supposed to do more. We're supposed to get better. We're supposed to leave it better for our children so they can leave it better for their children. He says Solomon accepted with thankfulness his inheritance of the past and then did his part in developing it more fully. He took his father's unfulfilled dreams and used his life to move them towards completion. There should not only be gratitude for what we receive from the past, but also responsibility for what we pass on to the future. Solomon is a good steward of the dynamics of history, and he has much to teach us here. Well, then Dr. Claypool begins to explore where Solomon went wrong. The Bible is very honest about what happened. He did not end his life the way that he began it. And it says, the Bible tells us when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away to other gods. So, how did this happen? Well, he quotes my dad's mentor, Carlisle Marney. He says that continuing education is the only kind of education there is. And I would say that about the whole business of human growth. In other words, if we think we've arrived and we no longer need to grow, that's when bad things happen. At our church, we teach Christian education as a theology. If we begin to stop asking, seeking, and knocking, that's where many tragic things happen, and that's exactly what happened in the life of Solomon. So what happened here? What was behind this? Well, he says it is very likely that it was affluence, luxuries, and being absorbed in material things that would have played a role in this. We know that when he did build the temple, he got lots of silver and gold, and he may have started to become fascinated with those things. But here's a clue. It says a clue that such a thing was happening lies in the fact that after taking only 7 years to build the temple, Solomon then spent 13 years building his own palace. And then he gives us a clue that's even more insightful, that Solomon ended up enslaving 153,000 people, many of them native-born Israelites, to furnish the labor supply for his extensive building projects. Isn't that sad? This is where we see so clearly someone who has forgotten their past and where they came from. Here, the Israelites are a race of slaves, and King Solomon ended up doing that same thing to some of his own people. How could they forget so badly where they really come from? And this is something that we see in history over and over again. It's something called dialectic theory, that things tend to move in a spiral fashion and evolve into their opposite. That's why we see, big uprisings in a country. Well, they'll overthrow a bad government and then become bad themselves. This happens a lot, and we see it in the life of Solomon. He says, never forget, we humans will always reflect the image of the God we worship. There's tremendous creative power in ultimate devotion. We tend to take on the qualities of that which is most important to us. So when Solomon was young and open to God, he was sinful. He was sensitive and insightful to people's needs. But when he turned to other gods, he no longer had those capacities, and it showed. And then he asked this question, what will you sacrifice? Things for the enhancement of persons, or persons for the enhancement of things? Wow. Solomon did a 180-degree shift from the God who values persons over things to the small g God who valued things over persons. So when he was old, says the book, something happened. He allowed his heart to be turned to other gods. And it doesn't have to happen. Unless we stop growing, stop asking and seeking and knocking, stop analyzing the affection of our hearts to see what our God really is. Someday, with the gods we have made, we will come face to face with the God who has made us. And only in that moment will the question, who is your God, be finally settled. Pray with me that unlike Solomon, we will find that our God, the real God, will be one and the same. I hope this has been enjoyable and insightful for you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Go in peace.